Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Claims Never Sleep. I'm joined by my co-host, Jen. Hey, Jen.
Good morning. I am super excited about this one. I don't know that I've ever learned so much about farming before in my life, and I live in a rural area.
I know. Yes. So to let everyone know, today we're joined by Paul Rousseau, and we're talking about agri-claims. And we've never talked about agri-claims on this podcast before. And I think I said it's like a masterclass on like coast to coast of, the different types of agricultural claims and farm culture that you will see, and it's fascinating, right? I could listen to Paul talk about agri-claims forever.
Yeah, I've never realized how much went into it, and it just takes the intricacies of claims to another level.
Yes. So, and he's just so knowledgeable, and like, I don't know, I learned a lot. So, if you're ready to learn, let's just bring Paul in and you can tune in.
This is the Claims Never Sleep podcast, presented by Cruiser Mitchell, with your host, Meghan Henry.
Good morning, Paul. Welcome to this episode of Claims Never Sleep. I'm so happy to see you.
Well, good morning.
I'm really excited for this podcast because I can sometimes gauge how good a podcast is going to be by the level of chat we have before we press record. And I think we probably could have recorded an entire episode before I actually pressed the button. So I think everyone's in for a treat today. So Paul, you and I talked a few weeks back, and again, great gauge for the quality of a podcast, because I think we talked for like quite some time, and had a really engaging conversation. And you've been in claims for like your whole career, right?
Correct. Yeah. So I started in '09. So January will make 17 years I've been in claims.
Okay. Well, what we ask a lot of folks who come on here, though, is how did you get into claims? Because not as it's a theme. Most people don't say, "Oh, I want to go into claims," or "I want to go into insurance." Like the other last week, we recorded a podcast, and our guest was like, "I wanted to be a police officer," and in fact was waiting to get accepted to the police academy, but had to wait some time. He was like, "Well, I just went into claims in the interim." So I'm curious to hear what your path was.
Well, so right out of college, I actually had a job. I was in the food service business. I managed restaurants for about 2 years right out of college, and my wife and I were pregnant with our first kid and had our first kid. And restaurant business is not good for kids' life. It's just not, because when they're all waking up, I'm just getting home most of the time. And so it took us about 5 months before we realized that's just not going to work. I would literally get home, feed my daughter her first bottle of the morning, and then they would all leave and do their life, and then I would go to sleep. And that was kind of our life for about 5 months. And so you miss all of the fun things because I'm not there. And so we kind of looked for another opportunity. And my wife's father actually started in claims. That's years and years ago. And he was a director of training for a insurance company. And he said, "Have you ever thought about doing that?" And I was like, "I don't even know what that is. Like, what is claims, right?
Right.
What does a claims adjuster do?" I was like, "I don't know." And so he kind of explained it to me, what they do. And I was like, "Oh yeah, I could do that. Like tomorrow, whenever you're ready." And so there just so happened at that point to be an opportunity with a kind of a sister company that was here locally in Texas. And so I applied, did the interview, got it, and the rest, as they say, is history. I literally started ground up and haven't stopped since.
Well, I feel like, though, your restaurant roots, though, is kind of like a startup to get you into claims, because you're kind of doing similar things. A lot of times you're managing issues that people might have. You have to problem solve. I mean, there's a lot of customer service, obviously, is huge in claims. So, without even knowing it, you probably were laying your own groundwork.
Oh, absolutely. I tell most of the folks that I have dealt with over the years, um, people go into claims a lot of the time from stuff like, police or just off the wall stuff where they don't really have to interact as much customer service wise. But we are a service industry. Like,
Mm-hmm.
people don't realize how much of a service industry it is, but it really is. We spend the majority of our time walking the insured or the claimant or whoever through the claims process, because for, I'd say, 50 to 60% of people I deal with on a daily basis, this is the first claim they've ever had. They have no clue
Yeah.
how the process works. So you spend a good amount of time, hand holding and kind of walking through, this is what the process should be like. And it's actually a dying art in our industry, because there's a lot less customer service orientedness about claims now, and more of a, how quickly can you get through them? How many claims can you
Yeah.
get through in a week, a month, a year? And so that's kind of the dying art of it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, or fortunately, however you look at it. But I've always advocated for that, the necessary need to have a good customer service oriented aspect of claims.
Yeah. I would agree with that. And I hear it a lot, though, too, that while there was a shift to automation, and I think certain parts of claims, can be automated and should be automated in the sense it makes the information process faster, that personal aspect of it, I don't think should go away, because especially when you're talking about people who've never been through this before, I think just having a person on the line to know that someone is actually looking at this data, whatever you're sending in, photographs of the water damage in your basement or the damage to your car, whatever it could be. I think that the feeling that there's an actual human being and not a bot that's processing it probably would, gives people like a little sense of ease, in that they're feeling heard, and that their claim is actually being managed by a human.
Oh, agreed. I think there are aspects of technology over the last 17 years I've been doing this that have really made our job as claims adjusters much easier and much more productive and faster. The caveat to that is, if you only lean on the technology and you don't have that customer service aspect of it, that the process starts to feel cold to the insured or the claimant, because then they're like, well, what do I need you for if all I'm doing is texting you photos and emailing you photos, and then you spit out something and I never talk to anybody? And there are still a good portion of people, I think the younger generations are definitely more anti talk. Like, they would much rather text and email and whatever rather than speak to you. But kind of, I would say the older millennials, which I would put myself in that Zennial category, right? The Zennials really remember, hey, phone calls was all we had. Like, you didn't have email
Yes.
and you didn't have text. Like, my first phone only did one thing. It made phone calls. Like, your cell phone did one thing, and that was it.
And you can
So,
play that snake game.
correct. And then if you really wanted to text somebody, you had to beep them, and then they would call you back, like, kind of deal. So I think technology has improved the transfer of information, but if you lean too heavily on it, I think sometimes we can kind of alienate or make the situation more cold.
Yes. And I also think so. My husband and I went 20 some years of driving with no accidents, and then had 2 car accidents. We both hit a deer within like 2 months of each other last year. And my experience was seamless, right? I didn't even talk to a human. Like, everything just went through the computer. It was fine. But with my husband, he forgot to insure the car. And so we had a little bit of an issue. So, like, I had to talk to somebody, and it was very difficult for me to get somebody on the phone. Like, they wanted it to be contactless. And I'm like, but my car, and so trying to I just remember sitting there that morning, like, screaming into the phone, like, I want a person, a human. And it was so hard to get to somebody.
Well, and I think that's part of it, like the automated aspect of like phone service, for the sake of argument, when you're talking about claims, being able to get somebody 100, or be able to call a 1-800 number to file a claim, right? Most of the time that is an automated process because it's just data entry and that can be done fairly quickly. But it's the one in 100 or 1 in 1,000 where there's a problem, where that can be very frustrating for somebody who just wants to speak to a normal human being who could say, hey, it's not like the other 1,000 claims that come through on a daily basis. We've got an issue. There's a problem. We forgot to insure it. It blew up. It went down a ravine and is stuck in a mud pit or something. Like there's a claims are one of those things where 9 out of every 10 claims is identical to the other 9, but that one claim will make everything worse because it's just not like any of the others.
Yeah. And that's what keeps it interesting.
If you didn't have that, it would be boring. Like it really would. I mean, everybody kind of has the same process, I think it is, with claims. And so if you're only working one aspect, which I am now, but I wasn't originally, the fact that I was a multi-line adjuster and could handle auto one day, liability the next, a house fire the next day, or an inland marine tractor who caught fire, something like that. You never knew. Like you'd walk in the next day and you're like, oh, it's crazy. Here's the new thing that happened today, And so the good and bad of that is it makes you so much more well-rounded because you've seen it all, literally. Versus being stuck in a silo where you take deer hit claims 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And you're like, oh, I know you hit a deer. Yeah. We're aware, because then you get bored. You do. And then I think a lot of the time it makes you, as an adjuster, you don't mean to, but you tend to push the claim rather than listening. Right. I mean, a lot of our job is actively listening, which is, hey, I hit a deer while not wearing my seatbelt and went through the windshield. That's something we'd want to know versus, oh, you hit a deer, moving on, kind of deal. Yeah. So it is a process that I think we get kind of very siloed in sometimes if you're stuck in that one role all day long.
Right. And so when you started back 17 years ago, what did you start handling?
So they kind of, the way that we did it is what I would consider old school, right? So new school is everybody you start with the baby claim, right? And you get oh, I hit a parked car, oh, I hit a deer, no injuries, no nothing. And we're going to kind of walk you through those claims. You'll get about 15 or 20 days worth of that. And then they'll kind of roll you into the next thing. Back in those days, it was sink or swim. Here's your claim, and that was just the way they did it. That's the way. I mean, a lot of folks that grew up kind of in claims like I did back in that 2009, 2010, 2011, it was sink or swim. Here's the fire hose. I hope you can take it, and it really, it was one of those things where if you could take it, it made you a better adjuster. But if you couldn't, it made you find a new career very quickly. Right. And it was a volume driven issue for a lot of that, that early time, is that they weren't going to give you, or I didn't start out taking hey, we had a 4-car pileup and 3 people are dead, right? Like that was not how we originally started, but you might get a house fire. You might get a couple of water losses. You might get a 3-car accident with injuries. Like that might be your first claim. It just is what it is. Yeah. But they would know kind of where the landmine was, where you don't want that claim. That kid's been here or that guy's been here for 6 weeks. He should not be handling the most complicated claim on the planet, type of deal.
So you started right out multi-line?
Multi-line from day one. Yeah.
That is really impressive. I think you're one of the first people who we've interviewed who had, and most people seems like they started out one of like the big national carriers handling auto claims or property claims or field adjusting.
Field adjusting.
Yeah. So it's really interesting to hear that.
Well, and I think that's just the product of how I started and where I started. So, if you're one of the multinationals, they went segmented much sooner. Right. So you had it where they started kind of dividing out auto, home, liability, and then tiering those steps, right? Like, phase one is little claims, and then two, and then three, and kind of tiering that whole process. The way that the company that I work for, that I used to work for, it was kind of, we were multi-line by necessity, right? Like it was a very small carrier, or a much smaller carrier, and we were only located in Texas. So it made it easier for you not to have to worry about kind of dividing your force.
Yeah.
You just needed to make sure that you had coverage for all of the different areas, which that made it more of a, we were more localized. Most of the claims that I got were all one county, right? So when you're geographically only in one county, it makes it a heck of a lot easier to be able to kind of take everything, because no
Yeah.
claim you're working is going to be more than 30 minutes to an hour away, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely a different way to like dive in than other carriers or other people we've talked to at other carriers. But I see the method, right? Just like
Yeah.
how you said, like you're kind of like, you're centralized in one area and you're going to get your feet wet in a lot of different things. Now, at the time, did you have something that you preferred, like any types of claims that you're like, oh, like I love a blazing fire, you know?
Well, I've always been partial to property.
Mm-hmm.
So way back when I was a teenager, and even before then, my best friend growing up, literally since kindergarten, we had pretty much stayed in the same schools and everything growing up. His dad was a general contractor in Louisiana, so he owned his own business. And so kind of from the time you get to point where you're like, hey, I need a summer job, like that was my summer job. Like, why not? And so I started around 14 doing just basic stuff around a job site, cleaning up, pushing a broom, painting, your basic stuff that
Yeah.
doesn't require a lot of neurons, but it does require a lot of technical skill, right? Like you're going to learn how to paint so that it doesn't look ugly. And so I did that off and on from 14 till I graduated college. And so I spent a good amount of time on job sites doing everything except for the three majors. We in Louisiana, you had to have a contract or a license to be an electrician, a plumber, or
Yep.
an HVAC guy. Everything
Yeah.
else you could do with just basic, hey, I
I
am
could
of
throw a
legal
hammer.
age to work,
Yeah.
And so I did a lot of that, and most of what the company handled was commercial in nature, commercial construction. So we did everything from drop ceilings to overhauls to complete construction from the ground up. So I spent a lot of time on job sites learning from master electricians and plumbers and master carpenters, which is a dying art in and of itself.
Yeah, it is.
And so that always gave me, I guess, the confidence, which is really what you'd see more often than not, that I might not know anything about a car, but I knew a lot about a house. So when I literally, I think right after I started, so I started in 2009, which in Texas, everyone in Texas remembers 2008, which was Hurricane Ike,
Yes.
right? So I started, that happened in, I want to say August of 2008. So my first, I'd say 6 months being, kind of let loose on claims was doing a lot of re-inspections for Ike claims in my area. So I would go out to houses that we already had an inspection done and we already wrote an estimate, but for whatever reason, they've got a public adjuster, they have a supplement, contractor needs something, they had to remove a giant tree off the house before they could finish the estimate, that kind of stuff. I would just do re-inspects, and then kind of before even learning the estimating software programs, I would go and just scope the losses, and then I'd go sit back in my office and get a mentor on the phone and be like, all right, now tell me, how do I make this into that and get it in the estimate? So that was kind of cutting teeth. I would do that, and then you'd get an auto claim, and then I'd do that on the side, kind of deal. And so I've always been partial to property over any of the other aspects. My absolute favorite, to be honest, is I would say more of the argument side of it. When it comes to like litigation, attorney
Yeah.
involvement, BI settlements, that part always was fun because it's more customer service. I guess it's not really customer
Yeah.
service. It's that ability to negotiate, which is really, I
Mhm.
think that's what a claims adjuster does 90% of the time is negotiate the claim,
Yep.
negotiate the price, negotiate the injuries, whatever that may be.
Um, what I like what you said about like the construction site scenes and learning about it, because early on in my career, I would get a lot of like fire or property damage claims, and being at those site inspections was so valuable because I would just listen to the banter between all the cause and origin experts, the electricians, and you just learn so much between them because they all know, they're all going to figure out what the cause was, and it's probably all going to be the same thing, which early on that was like eye-opening to me. I don't know why, but I was like, oh wow, they all agree, because you're just so used to the litigated side that no one agrees on anything. um
Right.
but I would just take it as an opportunity just to like be a wallflower and listen to what these experts are saying and what they're looking at and what they're like cluing in on as like clues as to what could have caused this fire or what could, and it was such a valuable experience. And and also like it doesn't hurt when you're like a young female attorney and that you're one of the only women on site. And they all kind of like
Yeah.
take you under the wing, like, here, let me show you how this works.
Well, and I think that you're absolutely right. The first fire I ever had, working claims, the company I worked for, we had insight, our in-house cause and origin guys, which is
Mhm.
kind of unheard of nowadays. Most of
Yeah.
those folks are going to be kind of, one of the carriers that you're going to sub something out to. And so the guy who was the cause and origin, he had like 25 years as a fireman before he started doing cause and origin. And so I met him with my boss on site because, of course, it's the first house fire you ever get into. So they're like, "Oh, we'll meet out all together." So it was definitely a learning experience because even with as much construction experience as I had, I'd never been on the site where you're trying to pick through rubble to figure out
Yeah.
like scorch patterns
Yeah.
and ignition sources and all of the other fun and kind of ruling out things, which
Hmm.
is a lot of what they do. Is it's not so much finding it, it's finding what it's not, right? Like,
Yeah.
what isn't it? It isn't going to be electricity because the wall outlet is still intact, for whatever reason.
Yep.
And so sifting through that fire was kind of interesting. I think I spent like 5 or 6 hours out there, which is completely a
Hmm.
waste of a day for most people. But for me, it made sense. I was like, I'd rather be out there and learn what's going on. And so being able to sit out there and them kind of going through and walking you through the logical steps. This is how we determine, was
Hmm.
definitely something. And kind of throughout my career, because I was multi-line, we had in-house SIU department, right? So
Yeah.
learning what are the fraud indicators for fire or for water or all these
Yeah.
things, and then going to a lot of SIU and fire and property loss, just learning experiences through CE, really help. Um,
Yeah.
and then the I would say the thing that kind of gave me the overall kind of clued me into everything was when I started taking stuff through the institutes with like CPCU and AIC,
Yep.
because you start to learn, oh, it's not just claims. There's like 30 other things that insurance does that have nothing to do with claims.
Right.
Who knew?
Who knew?
Right.
So you were at this more local Texas local carrier for a long time. So what prompted you to make the switch to a more national outfit?
Um, I think the biggest change or reason for the change was just wanting to further the career, right?
Hmm.
Um, the company I work for, I love. To this day, I still love them. But the problem is with a smaller carrier, is that there's only so high you can go and so many opportunities there are for promotion, right? You reach a point where you're ninth in line out of 30 people, to get the one job that's might be up to, next year.
Yeah.
And then once that job is somebody gets it, then it might be 6 to 10 years of you sitting in the same job with no real movement, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's I've always been a person who is driven. And I kind of see myself as I'm always trying to build to the next thing, right? Like I don't want to be
Mhm.
stagnant. And so always learning something new, or trying to find some new aspect of something, to kind of sink my teeth into and learn about, was kind of dying at that point. And so I looked around at what would be interesting to me. So what was an
Mm-hmm.
interesting, kind of caveat, or a different, place to go. And when you're multi-line, there's a lot of interest out there, right? You
Yeah.
could go just auto, you can go just property, you could go just liability, you could do all kinds of fun stuff. But I've always kind of, like I said, harkened back to the property side, which is what I felt the most comfortable about. And so when I kind of look to move and kind of move up, uh, the new career kind of keeping in the agribusiness space, or keeping in the farming space, was definitely something I wanted to do. And
Mm-hmm.
so that kind of just fell in my lap one day.
So explain more as to like what exactly it is that you're doing now, because this is something new, right? You and I talked about it. Like we haven't exactly had on anyone in your space before.
Right.
So it's interesting, but it's very different. But it makes sense,
It is and it isn't, right?
Yeah.
Like, so personal lines, for the sake of argument, is mostly just your day-to-day houses and autos, right?
Hmm.
Whether it be casualty or property. Um, and most everybody has an apartment or a house or something like that they live in. The farming or agri space is that on steroids, for the sake of argument, right? So every farmer has a house, for the sake of argument, which is kind of that personal lines, but it's not, because most of the time it's on 900 acres,
Yeah.
and there are barns, and there are confinement spaces, and there are stalls, and there are tractors, and there are
Hmm.
combines, and there's all these other things that are normally found on a farm that you don't see in downtown Houston or downtown, New
Anywhere.
York, right? For the sake of argument. And I've always worked in that space, some, but now I've pretty much focused exclusively in that space.
Hmm.
So that space kind of gives a lot of the same aspects, because you do look at houses, and I don't do auto anymore, but there are autos, obviously. And then there's all the other stuff. There's all the, what I would call, all the farm specific stuff, which is, I think, the more fun to look at, just in
Hmm.
general, because you get to see a lot of how our food gets made, right? You get to walk
Yeah.
into places where, they're milling corn, for feed, or they're growing peanuts, or they're growing, kind of thinking some of the ones that I've dealt with, a lot of grains, a lot of
Hmm.
rice, a lot of chicken, turkey, pork, cow, all of the fun things that we all eat, that we're going, how does that really get made? If
Hmm.
you just pick it up at your local grocer.
Right.
So that aspect of it is kind of the difference in the space. Um, it also makes it, I think, the most unique part about it is that it's not just going out, hey, I had a house fire. You could have a house fire and also have the grain bins and the barns and stuff at that same location on fire. Or you can have a hurricane or a tornado rip the whole thing apart.
Yeah. And then what about the actual livestock?
Oh, well, that's in and
And
of
that's
itself. So
very expensive part.
well, it is. Now, the difference there is, for most carriers in that space, and I say that in kind of quotations, for the
Hmm.
vast majority of the carriers in that space, you're going to insure cattle, right? Or
Mhm.
chickens or turkeys or horses, but you're really insuring them at market price.
Mhm.
Okay. So if the beef price of a cow um, is, 3 cents a pound, 4 cents a pound, 6 cents a pound, whatever, live, going through a cattle auction, then that's what you're really going to insure the cow for, right? A lot of
Mhm.
the times with a maximum of, $1,000 a head or 2,000 a
Yeah.
head or something of that nature. Now, are there high dollar stuff? Absolutely. And
Mhm.
especially like, let's say in Texas, you have a lot of our FFA, our 4-H
Yeah.
folks that are
Yeah.
growing pigs for show or cows for
Mhm.
show. They won't get insured the way that you would just your
Right.
300 head of cattle sitting out in the in the field somewhere. Or your prized racing horse, right? A lot of those
Mhm.
won't even get insured with us. You're going to go to
Yeah,
a
that's me.
non-standard carrier to insure your
Mhm.
$200,000 racing
Oh, of
horse,
course.
kind of deal.
Yes.
Um, so that part is kind of um, different, but for the most part, you're going to see more of a homogenized unit price, right?
Mhm.
Rice is rice per bushel or per pound or per, whatever that may be. Same thing with corn and those commodities. Um, the big issue there is finding out the price, right? Like you need to
Yeah.
know where in the market are you going to go? Where in the world do you go to get the price of corn in southern Texas, for today?
Yeah, and it probably also depends on where that farm is distributing their product. Are they
Right.
in an international market? Are they in the domestic market? And I imagine that does change the value of the product and what.
Somewhat. A lot of
Mhm.
what you see in the market space, is you do have those bigger you do have those bigger farms. There are some out there
Mhm.
where they're going direct to distributor somewhere, right? Like they're going to sell
Mhm.
across the market to whoever, whoever that may be. And there are some big cattle operations where you start talking about like your, like the 4-6s or like the King's Ranch down in Kingsville, right? Some of the bigger ranches on planet Earth,
Mhm.
where they have such a large volume that they can go direct. But for most of the of what you're looking at is you're going to have, even with your bigger your bigger farms, they're going to grow their product, and then it's going to go to either a livestock house, or it's going to go to like if it's crops, it might go to a co-op, and the co-op is going to buy it
Mhm.
and then bulk it together to ship it out somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And mainly that's due to the fact that everything's live to a certain degree, right? Like you
Mhm.
can't ship it to 10 buck 2 and expect it to be alive when it gets there, right?
Yeah.
It has to that's something that kind of getting into this aspect of it, you don't realize how locally that food
Mhm.
really is. There are a ton of dairies in Texas, and most of those dairies, the milk from that dairy doesn't go more than a few miles from that dairy before it
Yeah.
is processed at a plant somewhere and is bottled and shipped out from there. So you don't normally see, for the most part, where your dairy milk is going to be shipped from Texas to California or California to Texas. There's just no
Yeah.
reason. There's too many dairies floating around for that.
Um, and this is I think this is fascinating because it's stuff you don't typically think about. But I imagine when you're looking at these claims, okay, you're talking about some of the larger producers, but these smaller producers, and they have a claim. It could be catastrophic to their livelihood. It,
It
it,
absolutely is. I mean, for the most part, when you talk about a farmer, their job is their life. Like it,
yeah.
unlike you or I, where we go to work and then we have a
Mhm.
completely different life when we come home. Their life starts at home, work is at home, and it ends at home, right? And it's been explained to me by many farmers that farmers have about a 10-year cycle, right?
Mhm.
3 years are going to be great. 3 years are going to be horrible, and 3 years they're going to break even. So you live and die by the 10th year. You know, you can completely plummet and no longer be able to suffice your, to exist as a farmer on that 10th year, because you're on your heavy years, when you're making lots of money, you're stocking some aside, or you're building up your farm, you're doing repairs to machinery, stuff like that, to be ready. On the really lean 3 years, you're pinching your pennies and trying to, and losing your savings. And then those middle 3 are keeping you afloat. So that last year decides whether or not, in a 10-year, in a decade, do you continue for the next decade or not?
Yeah.
It's
And
so
that
crazy.
as an industry is kind of where we see it going.
Wow.
And when you were talking in the beginning about customer service, I can see, especially in this line of business, how important it is. And as I said to you kind of offline, I live in Northeast PA, whereas Megan is more in the Philly area. And so I know a lot of farmers because there's just a lot of rural land out here. And I was talking to somebody at my daughter rides horses, and I was at a horse show and talking to one of the other parents. And they drove overnight to Maryland to the horse show. And I was like, why in the world? She's like, well, I have to milk the cows. She's like, my husband can't do it at night and in the morning. And she's like, so I have to do it at night. He'll do it in the morning, and we're going to get back so I can milk them again at night. And it's just mind boggling. Like, there's no such thing as a sick day. Like, there's no such thing as a vacation. Like, the cows need to be milked.
And it's definitely, I mean, you start looking at, most dairies are on a 24-hour cycle, which means they milk 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And there's no argument over whether or not you're going to do it or not, because the cow wants to be milked. Like, it's going to happen, or you're going to make the cow sick. So, a lot of it is usually we'll see it either in 2 or 3 shifts, right? Either they're going to go on 2 shifts every 12 hours, right? Or it might be 3 shifts, and they'll have maybe a little time in between, to make that work. But you're absolutely right. Like, farming is one of the few, I would say, jobs where it is a 24 hours a day, 7 days a week job. It never sleeps. It never grows old. When a lot of these farmers make their financial investment on the year is like a year and a half before yield, which is crazy to think about. But in what world do you put money out and then wait a year and a half to get money back, right? Like, it's a crazy idea, but it works. I mean, they've been doing it. It's a science. I mean, they can tell you, most farmers, no matter what they're growing or whatever they're raising, they can tell you without too much uncertainty what a year and a half from now is going to look like, barring obviously just catastrophicness of some
right. And if they have a loss like that, that's their entire livelihood. There's no, like, this particular family, they sell their milk to Chobani. So Chobani comes and picks it up once a week, and because it's only about an hour away in New York. But like, then what? Like, Chobani could recover. They have all these other farms they're getting milk from. But like, if they have cows, or if they, like, their livelihood is gone. So I can imagine how just devastating it is for people.
You see a lot of that. You really do. And that's kind of, that's where I say customer service has a big aspect in what we do, because we spend so much time in this job with the farmer, right? Like, every farm is different, but nobody knows that farm better than the farmer who works it, right? It's usually a generational farm for most folks. So this is their second, third generation. Or if they're a new farmer, they're a new farmer in the sense that maybe they lived on a farm and worked for their dad, and now they're out working their own farm, right? That is the way traditionally it has been. And so when they have a loss, right, the barn burns down, that the milking parlor burns down. Now the aspect isn't so much of, oh my God, we have a building with physical stuff that's damaged, but how do we get the cows milked? Do we have the ability to milk them, right? Because again, they're still going to want to be milked. And if we don't milk them, then either they have to sell the herd, which then puts the farmer in a devastating, situation, because now all of the genetics that goes into this process, which is a huge proponent of input in these farms, becomes something that can really affect the overall livelihood for generations, right? If you sell a herd that is 3 generations deep in genetics, you get to the point now where they might never recover because the milking will never come back.
Wow. And
Well,
I'll
that
tell
makes
you,
me so sad.
you're talking about like most farmers do it because it's a family business and they've kind of inherited or gone into it. So you went into claims because your father-in-law was in claims. I went into claims because my uncle was in claims. Never, ever would I go into farming because somebody in my family was in farming. It just all of my friends who are in it, it sounds like the hardest job on the
Farmers, I will tell you, I would put farmers up there with your military and your police officers, your firemen, your first responders. There's a certain ideology, there's a certain grit to it. Like you have to want to do it. Not everybody can do it. Not everybody can be a police officer. Not everybody can be a fireman. Not everybody can be a soldier. And some people, it's not in the nature. It just isn't. But I think a lot of what you see is you don't see, for the most part, a city, somebody who's born and raised in the city, right? Who never goes to a farm ever, deciding I'm going to be a cattle farmer tomorrow, right? Like, for the sake of argument, most of the time they're going to be raised in that environment because it isn't something mentally that you can wrap your head around if you've never been to a farm. You will never understand what it takes to do that stuff.
Unless it's a Hallmark movie. Then
Unless, well, yeah, or the Walter Boys.
It's perfect. 90 minutes with commercials. You get your 2 hours and you're there, right?
Yeah, and they're always like very well dressed and clean.
And you've never been to a farm where it's really nasty and it smells. No, it's just a little muddy because it rained, and they're gonna fall in the mud and it'll be cute. It's some of these things are not like the others, and that's a lot of it. So farmers do a job that we as a society could never exist without farmers. Without a doubt.
No.
There's no question. And so it's a thankless job 90% of the time, right?
Yeah.
But on the 10%, it can be really rewarding for farmers. Some of the nicest people, the most giving people that I've ever met in my life are farmers because they're willing to give you the shirt off their back, if you need it. And in most cases, when you talk about, really catastrophic issues with farmers, the neighbors are going to help. Like that's almost always a guarantee, right? Whether it be a big dairy fire, whether it be something like that. I've worked way too many claims where they have a huge loss, which could absolutely be catastrophic. And before I can get out there or before, I've got a solution, they're calling me going, hey, Bill down the street is also a dairy and he's willing to milk my cows for me.
Yeah.
So then we're looking at, okay, let's problem solve. How do we get your cows there and back? How do we get your, because if Bill's willing to do it, by God, we're going to get it figured out one way or another. And so that's the difference that you'll see with the farming community as a whole is, one, they're always willing to help each other. And two, they're not waiting for us. By and far and large, the farmer is always going to be ready. He's got a plan. She's got a plan for tomorrow, for the next day. If the fire happens here, what can I do? How can I fix this? And so whereas you or I have a house fire and your house burns down, you're going to get on the phone with the insurance company and go, I got no place to go. All my clothes are gone. Farmer's out on the field the next day, period, the end of story.
Yeah.
So they'll be like, I'm going to call Bill. He's letting me stay. We're going to be fine.
Yeah.
for the most part.
So this is one thing I thought of, and you might not know this or have the answer to this, but we were talking about hurricanes and stuff before we start recording. And I remember last year when there was those Florida hurricanes, the people who had the horses and they were just releasing them
Mhm.
from now. Do, do you have any insight on that? Because meanwhile, I'm like, they're letting the horses go. Like, are they ever going to find them again?
So that is customary.
Okay.
In most what I would call natural disasters, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your hurricanes, tornadoes, wildfires are a big, whether you look in California or even in Texas, we had some major fires last year. Um, that is standard, and it's because they are living, breathing animals, right?
Yeah.
So for the most part, they know where the danger is. If you
Yeah.
pin them, they don't have the ability to escape that danger. They're stuck. Whereas if they're roaming free, they
Mm-hmm.
have the ability to avoid the danger. Most of the time, they are easily definable because, let's say, horses, for the sake of argument, or cows, are usually branded, right?
Yeah.
So with your larger farms or even your smaller farms, if they're not branded, they're usually tagged in the ear,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you'll see an orange or a yellow or a red tag with a lot number. Those numbers go to a database which tells folks where they're at, right?
Yeah.
Same thing with a brand. Brands are they're usually part of livestock commission has those brands. They
Got
know
it.
whose brand that might be. And then you also have in your big farming areas, a lot of the policing units will have their own livestock police,
Got
right?
it.
Like
Okay.
in Texas, most counties have a livestock portion. So your county sheriffs have a livestock division. That's what they do is catch cows or horses or
Mm-hmm.
pigs on the road or just at large because they do get out. I mean, it
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
So it is an interesting question because if you don't know, you don't know, right? But yes, they're easily identifiable for the most part. The ones you have to where you can't do that are your ones that are susceptible to death very easily, right?
Mm-hmm.
Birds,
Chickens.
for instance, are horrible for everything. That's why they're inside for the most part, right? So if you're looking at a grow house or an egg laying facility, they're very, 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 very climatized, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it can't get above this degree, it can't get below this degree. We want to make sure they've got plenty of water, food, all of those things, right? And that's because birds are notorious for killing themselves. Like
Yeah.
they're not very intelligent creatures for the sake of argument. So whether that be turkeys or chickens, chickens are the worst. Um, are they tend to have issues where you can't just release them. Now, a turkey that's raised in captivity in a grow house cannot be released. But there are plenty of farms that raise turkeys wild, right? For the
Mm-hmm.
sake of argument, they might buy wild turkeys, put them on their 100 acres and let them just roam and populate, and then they have turkeys for Thanksgiving. They're not using
Yeah.
them as a crop or a commodity, but just as a we want to hunt them for our food, as such. Um, and that goes back to how the USDA and
Mm-hmm.
how the different organizations are going to let you kind of produce those crops or those animals for consumption,
Yeah.
nationally. You wouldn't be able to do that with a wild animal. It would have to
Got it.
be in a controlled environment.
I am always perplexed that there's chickens are very common now in the suburbs. People like to have chickens,
Mhm.
and there's a house nearby. They have free range chickens, and they live on kind of a busy road. I'm like, this seems dangerous.
Well, a lot of the time with free range, well, I say free range, and I don't know every aspect. Here, we do see them a lot in neighborhoods, but they're going to be in a coop of some kind, right? And the reason being is that here you've got to worry about animals that are going to kill them,
Yes.
like they're, cougars Mountain
Yeah.
lions, not so much here,
Fox.
but you do get those. Wolves, coyotes. They will
Yeah.
decimate a 20 or 30 flock head within minutes. I mean,
Hmm.
and they will kill them not so much always for food, but just for the sheer sake of it. They're kind of indiscriminate killers, unfortunately. Um, but a lot of the times too, you have a wolf pack or a coyote pack where they're not going to kill one; they're going to kill 5 or 6 because there's 5 or 6 hunters in that group,
Hmm.
right? Um, so that does, yeah. I mean, it is an interesting kind of. I've been to some free range places where they've got 30, chickens just running around the yard. And you're like, why? Why would you do that? But they live rural so that you can do that. There's
Yeah,
nobody on
this
the
is
road.
not. This is not road. This is like right down the street from the elementary school. They just like hang out in the backyard. Sometimes they're across the road. They just like are. I was like, I think they need a better method. They really-
Yeah, I can see that for sure. Ducks are notorious for being free range, right?
yeah.
For the most part, but of course they can fly, so that does make it a little easier for them to get up and move unless you clip their wings. So
Mhm.
you do see a lot of ducks that will be kind of a free range aspect of it, whereas turkeys and chickens not so much.
Yeah.
So is your company regionalized? Or are you kind of all across the
So
country?
I handle claims now in the lower 48.
Okay.
So the company I used to work for was centralized, and I only handle claims in Texas. Um, since moving kind of to the aspect of just handling agribusiness, agri-farm, it is farm, but it is farm in every. I mean, technically, we have stuff in Canada, in Alaska, and in Hawaii, but it's so remote and it's so small that in the amount of properties that we have insured, that it would most of the time would be handled remotely. You're not normally
Yeah.
going to send somebody. You're not going to pay somebody to go stay and fly to Hawaii
Oh,
and to look at a
no.
I
claim for
mean,
hail
I think you
damage
should
on one
volunteer to
roof.
be tribute.
I have tried, believe me. I'm like, I'll go if I have to go to Canada, I will this one time. But
Yeah.
a lot of what we do, I've always been a field adjuster, right? So I've always been in the field, which kind of the dichotomy is, the desk adjuster, right? So you're either one or the other for most point. You either handle everything remotely from a desk, or you're kind of out in the field with the folks. You're going to locations, you're inspecting it, you're putting hands on everything. And I've always been that in that field role. So with that being said, it's kind of difficult um, to do that, like for me personally, remotely, right?
Yeah.
I do it if I absolutely had to. And sometimes you do. Sometimes it just economically doesn't make sense to go, you know, fly to Hawaii for,
Hmm.
one claim. Um, but for the most part, I prefer to be on site. I find it gets me the most knowledge as quickly as possible to help the insured out.
Well, and it absolutely makes sense though, because as you were talking about how every farm is so different and how they operate, and it really helps you to know the inner workings of how that particular farm works. And
Correct.
and I think you're only really going to get an understanding of that by being there and getting to
Correct.
know them and talking to them and
And
just
it also
seeing.
depends on the claim, right?
Hmm.
There are claims that can definitely be handled remotely.
Sure.
I am so in my multi-line role previously, we didn't have any kind of limit dichotomy, right? There was no phase one, one was telephone or desk, and then two was here and three was here. So like I could go look at a claim for hail damage to somebody's shingle roof, and then the next day it'd be a house fire. You know what I mean? So those claims would be normally handled by different people in kind of your multi-state or your regional or national carriers, because they kind of break those claims out where if you've got, let's say, a glass claim, or you've got like a shingle roof claim on a small house, those could be handled remotely for the most part, whereas somebody's house that burns down needs to be handled in kind of by a large loss adjuster, which is what I do now, right?
Yeah.
And so in my role now, it's almost impossible to not look at a claim, right? To go out
Yeah.
there, because every claim I get should be quote unquote large in nature.
Mhm.
So it should be your, your fires or your, I've got hail damage, but I've got hail damage to 50 buildings on my farm, right? Like where
Mhm.
we need to look at
Mhm.
every building on the farm. Or I have a tornado claim that's sucked up a grain bin or two, or the whole complex, depending on what that may be. So those claims tend to be more complex in nature and require a certain subset of kind of
Yeah.
knowledge.
So you're traveling pretty much far and wide, but also probably to definitely more remote areas, which can prove to
I
be
would
a,
say so.
a challenge.
Yes. I would say 90% of my claims that I work now are in the middle of nowhere.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
so I handle all of Texas. We've got two large loss adjusters for the whole state, right?
Hmm.
So, but only in agribusiness and only in our little area for property. So, um, but yeah, I can go as far south as the border and as far
Hmm.
north as Oklahoma. It just kind of
Hmm.
depends, where we might be. But for by and large, you don't normally see these bigger farms in like downtown Houston. There are
Yeah.
a few. There are still some out there, but a lot of what people don't also realize is yes, you might not have the farm there, but what about the processing plants?
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
Hmm.
You're bringing your cattle to process to be slaughtered and then turned into steak. That doesn't usually happen in the middle of nowhere. That's usually close
Yeah.
to transportation,
Hmm.
close to cities, stuff like that. So not only do I handle the farm aspect, but I handle the agribusiness aspect, which is where we
Yeah.
do all of the processing stuffs, where
Right.
you see these big dairy operations, not the milking portion, but the actual
Processing. Yeah.
let's process it.
Yeah.
Let's our slaughter plants, our canning operations, right? For
Hmm.
vegetables. We bring our green beans in and then they have to be blanched and canned and pressurized and all these other things. So I do a lot more of that now than I did in my previous role. But that's also because all I'm handling is kind of that aspect of it
Yeah.
now.
Do you have um an area of the country though that has become one of your favorites to travel to?
So we have adjusters kind of all over the
Hmm.
48. So for the most part, I stay in Texas.
Okay.
And that's mainly because Texas is one of the highest
Biggest.
producers of
Yes.
stuff, right? Like, I mean,
Yes.
hence the reason why they have me here, right?
Yes.
I didn't realize how big we were until I moved over into this role, mainly because, when you're multi and you're doing everything, you don't really have time to kind of poke your nose in a bunch of little aspects of your
Yeah.
life, right? But Texas grows a good percentage of the food. California is a big grower of food.
Hmm.
You've got your plains area, your Iowa, your Wisconsin, your Michigan, your Idaho. They grow a lot of food, and even up like y'all's area, Pennsylvania, New
Oh
York,
yeah.
Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, they all grow a good bit of food. They're just different foods, I guess
Right.
is kind of the way. So, like, if you want
Hmm.
potatoes, you're not going to go here. You're going to go to Idaho or,
Yeah.
out up that way. If you're looking at cattle, you're going to be looking at here. You're going to look at like the Ohio area is
Hmm.
is a big area for cattle. California is huge for cattle,
Yeah.
same as Texas. So and even up north, you'll get some of that in the Pennsylvania, New York area. You'll get some cattle because there is still a good bit of Pennsylvania, New York that
Oh
is
yeah.
fairly rural. People
Yeah.
think of
Most
like
of it.
New York, and Philadelphia and places like that. But it's like, yeah, the rest of that state is completely rural as it gets,
Yeah.
which I didn't even think about that until I got into this role, and I was like, oh yeah, you're right.
Even some parts of New Jersey is pretty rural. Depend like.
And for the most part, in most states, you're gonna have kind of that really really rural area, and then the really populated area. Um, the smaller states is where you get in. There's not enough land mass to have
Yeah.
rural along with there. Like your Rhode Islands, your Marylands, your obviously
Mhm.
Washington D.C. ain't got a whole lot of anything, right? It's all populated at this point. But even like your Carolinas, your Georgias,
Oh yeah.
Florida even still has, inside the peninsulas, there's a
We have
lot of rural
oranges
area
and
there. Yeah, oranges are big, blueberries are big there.
mhm.
Um, they also do some of the nuts are there. Almonds are very big in California. That is kind of a huge crop
Mhm.
for them. So you start going through it, and you're like, you don't realize that pretty much every state grows something. It's
Yeah.
just they don't always grow the same stuff.
Yeah, it's funny. I grew up in Connecticut, and the town I grew up in is called the bedding plant capital of Connecticut. So it's like you get your poinsettias, they grow them in the greenhouses in my town.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah. I mean, Vermont's big for maple syrup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just,
Mhm.
and that's their big crop. That's what they grow. Or I guess excrete, out of the trees. But
Yeah.
same difference. You grow the
Yes.
tree. So, but that's the thing. If unless you have a state kind of like a California or a Texas where you have um, different zones, right? Like
Yeah.
down in the Gulf, you're going to get different crops than if you're up in the Panhandle, right? And the
Mhm.
same for like West Texas is very flat and arid, so you can raise cattle easier. It's flat. You can,
Mhm.
There's nothing for miles and miles and miles. Um, that's a different aspect. Most states are small enough that it's pretty much geographically or topographically about the same throughout the state for the most part.
Yeah. This is like a master class on
Yeah.
like I need my kids to listen.
Growing up in South Louisiana, I grew up around Baton Rouge, so
Mhm.
there were farms, but they're less about growing animals and more about growing crops, right?
Mhm.
Soybean, corn,
Mhm.
green beans, sweet potatoes, and rice are the
Mhm.
big crops down there. And then one that has kind of made its resurgence that was never a big crop. Well, I say never. It was always a big crop, and then it kind of slowed down. Was sugarcane.
Mhm.
Sugarcane is one of those things that has really taken on a life of its own because people are wanting to stay away from sugars, true sugar, right? And so natural sugarcane is, you know, healthier is what they say
Yeah.
for you. But it's a crop that, most people overlook
Yeah.
time and time again.
Well, Paul, this is fascinating. I never thought I would learn this much about agriculture. I don't know why I didn't think it, but this is like this. I could listen for hours about you talking about what's grown where and the impacts of it all. But we are pretty much out of time. Before we let you go, I want to ask you this. I ask this of most our guests. Knowing what you know now throughout your career, what advice would you give your younger self?
I think the advice I'd give to my younger self would be claims insurance as a whole, right? Is such a big world that you can always find your home, if that makes sense. You don't have to always be in claims. You don't have to start there. A lot of folks that I've met in this industry didn't always start in claims, but ended up there, right?
Hmm.
And didn't start in insurance. I mean, like you said at the beginning, most everybody came from somewhere else to start. But insurance touches every life in one way or another.
Yeah.
And so I look at um, this industry as a service industry.
Mhm.
Um, and really, we always have looked at it as a second responder, right? You've
Hmm.
got your first responders that come in and get the people out of the burning buildings and stuff like that. And then they call us to do the rest, which is
Hmm.
what we should do. That's what we're there for. And so
Yeah.
it's a calling just like anything else. You need people who really love helping people
Yeah.
because that's mostly what we do.
Well, I think anyone who has you as on their claim is lucky to have you because I can feel your passion for it too, and your compassion. So, bravo to you.
Well, thank you.
And of course, if you like what you hear, to everyone who's listening, please like and subscribe to Claims Never Sleep. You can find us on your favorite streaming platform as well as YouTube. And thanks for tuning in.
This is the Claims Never Sleep podcast, presented by Cruiser Mitchell, with your host, Meghan Henry.